This is the MSI RX470 Gaming X 4GB edition. It's a card that's trying to set itself up as the budget 1080p full experience card of this generation, trying to fill the boots of the popular 970 of the last generation as the 1080p pick. It's also gnawing at the slightly more expensive 1060 range of this generation from Nvidia. So how does it stack up? And how is MSI's spin an offering on this card? Does it deserve a spot in your budgeted gaming PC? Well, I'll be answering just that in this video. First off, this card comes core clocked at 1242 MHz standard, or 1254 MHz boosted with the MSI gaming app with one click of a button being set to the overclock profile. The memory is clocked at a frequency of 1650 MHz or 1675 boosted again to that boosted profile. Whilst it is easy to flick through the profiles in the MSI gaming app, with a custom 8-pin power input, extra power draw means you can push the card further with overclocking, and MSI Afterburner software is generally easy to use if you want to push that card a little bit further. I was able to get around 80 MHz overclock without touching the voltages and keeping stable on Unigine Valley benchmarks, but I'm sure with more tinkering the card can be pushed quite far in the right busy hands. Generally, MSI cooling has been something I've always enjoyed about their line. This isn't an exception. The RX470 has the latest Twin Frozer 6 cooling system with the Torx 2.0 fans to power the spearhead of the cooling. It also has a hefty copper-based set of heat pipes to drag the heat off the core, where there is a nickel-plated copper base plate. And the heatsink is the width of the GPU to spread out and dissipate the heat, and in most gaming situations the card was hitting the low to mid 60s, whilst in Combustor the burn-in test took it to the heat to a top of 72 degrees over a 20-minute burn. Still pretty damn impressive in my opinions, and means heat isn't going to be something you'll have to worry about unless you live in a dusty environment. Then you might want to check your components for dust pretty regularly. This card did run hotter than the relatively comparable 1060 Gaming X edition, also from MSI, which I reviewed with the same cooling system, but not by much. Also, hitting these heats means you have that comfortable headway for extra heat which overclocking brings. One big thing for soundophobes like someone who records audio, like, a YouTuber like me, is silent running. The fans won't spin until the card reaches 60 degrees C, which means until you game or you're benchmarking out of the blue, then you aren't going to hear even a stir from this GPU. And this is very important for me as I try to keep my build as quiet as possible so I can record my mic as clean as possible outside of gaming, and I want no background noise. MSI boasts military class components on their board and a 6-phase PWM design, and it has Japanese solid caps, super ferrite chokes, and high C caps. In short, the components on this board are all of good quality, and that's just their rubber stamp for it. Looks wise, this card fits in with the Gaming X quite bold scheme of the red MSI Dragon, with red and black plastic on the cover, smooth and red on one side made to look like dragon scales, and bumpy and black on the other side. I do think this card has some character, but it's going to come down to whether it fits into your colour scheme and your build, and if you have a window, and if you care about the looks of your gaming PC's guts. One bummer is there's no backplate on this GPU, which was seen on the 1060 Gaming X edition. However, with a black PCB, the card still looks good in any build because of that black PCB, and in my opinion, black PCB is the way forward. On the front plate there's 2 HDMI ports, 2 display ports, and there's only 1 DVI port. This is an interesting choice to move again to the more modern display ports, but also quite a few monitors only use DVI connectors, and if you have several monitors like me, you might want to make sure you have enough connectors and the right connectors for your displays, especially if your monitors have been with you for a long time and have gone through each build you've made. One big advantage over the 1060s, the more budget-conscious card in the new Nvidia lineup, is the 1060s cannot be put into SLI mode or basically having multiple 1060s powering your system. The 470 can be paired with another GPU in crossfire mode. This could mean that in the future, one upgrade could be to pair this card with another 470 as an upgrade, or generally just putting 2 of these babies together to squeeze as much power as possible. This AMD GPU also sports FreeSync as a feature, so if you do have FreeSync support on your monitor, it might be a plus for you over the Nvidia offerings. The RX 470 Gaming X does have customizable LEDs. Actually, they're the same set of LEDs on the Gaming X 10 series from Nvidia. The scale, like streaks on the front of the GPU, only light up red to match the finish on the GPU, but the MSI logo on the top will light multicolored. I still feel the same way about this, and it's a bit of a token effort, and it doesn't actually add that much to the visuals of the card. But it does make sense with the red material on the GPU casing and fans that the more multicolored LEDs may clash with the card itself, but in general it's not really a big feature on this card. Just to quickly talk about the price, this card in the UK is sitting around the £190 mark in most retails new, and to compare this, the 1060 Gaming X 3GB version is sitting around the £220 mark, with the 6GB version at the £260 or more mark just generally. Also, the GTX 970 the Gaming X, while no longer being in main retailers, can be bought for around £210 off eBay, maybe more, maybe less. So these cards are sort of the ballpark where the 470 is swinging in. And with higher memory than the 1060 3GB version, some games like GTA that use the extra VRAM might go to the 4GB 470, and it's worth keeping in mind when I talk about the performance and price after the benchmarking segment. So with the nitty gritty of the card itself, how does it perform? Everything was tested on my current rig with the MSI Gaming 5 motherboard, Intel i5 4690K, not overclocked, but the turbo takes it to 3.7 GHz, 16GB of 1866MHz Kingston Predator RAM, and if there is any footage of a game or benchmarks taking place, remember that Relive, or basically that's AMD's proprietary screen recorder and game capture device, eats about 4 to 6 frames of a game or the footage, and I ran the benchmarks when Relive was off. So first off, the synthetic benchmarks. In 3D Mark's Fire Strike, there was a graphics score of 11,660, with Graphics Test 1 averaging 54.51 FPS, and Graphics Test 2 47.38 FPS. TimeSpy had a score of 3,695, Graphics Test 1 averaging 25.09 FPS, and Test 2 20.46. When looking at comparison, users with the same card had pushed it a lot further with overclocks, so it's worth bearing in mind, as this card has the headroom to do so with that cooling and extra power. In Unigine Valley benchmark, we got 45.4 average FPS, 24.8 minimum, and 86.7 maximum, with a total of 1,899 score. Going into the real world of the frames in games, first off, I took Overwatch at all maxed out settings and ran Fraps benchmarking tool to get an average of 122, minimum of 62, and maximum of 154 FPS. In general, Overwatch isn't going to stump this card, and out of the benchmarking, playing Overwatch maxed out was absolutely fine. Second up was an interesting one, as Vulkan has an effect on the performance of Doom. Using OpenGL in quite a hefty action sequence and all the settings maxed out, I got a min of 57 and a max of 114. Now, because Fraps for some reason doesn't work with Vulkan, I couldn't record, but there was a noticeable jump of around 20 to 30 FPS with the Vulkan setting enabled, with the action scenes no longer dipping into the 60s but staying in the 70s and higher. And it was really impressive to see this jump happen, actually, and unfortunately, Doom is one of the games on a very short list of Vulkan supportees. Far Cry Primal with the HD texture pack installed and everything maxed out, benchmark came back with the average FPS of 51, max of 66 and low of 41. With everything instead on high, still with the HD texture pack, we got an average of 75, high of 84, and low of 65. As a DirectX 11 game, it is interesting to see that this card did struggle a bit with everything maxed out, and isn't comfortably playable without just a few adjustments. However, something interesting about Far Cry Primal is the vegetation seems to suck the most frames, and action scenes are usually outside of the forests and will run better than the exploring segments. In short, this card can be impressive, as we see Doom with the DirectX 12 game and Vulkan API in show. In general, this card will be able to either get the highest settings in games in 1080p or almost the highest on some of the most intensive games that are maybe DirectX 11 as well to get a smooth 60 FPS in 1080p experience. As most games are still DirectX 11, and in my test the 1060 does perform 10 or so FPS higher in some, it might be worth asking yourself whether the performance of today is key, with future-proofing in mind with the 470 and also the ability to upgrade with an extra 470 to crossfire with. Interestingly actually, the 970 Gaming X does perform similarly in Doom with OpenGL as the 470 does with Vulkan enabled, so that is also something to take into account, that the 970 just with raw power can push its way to similar performance to the 470 even with Vulkan on Doom. But in general, the 470 is a very capable card. It's around £40 or more cheaper depending on the 1060 variation, and has the modern features of this generation, and is cheaper than the 970 on eBay at the moment. So it's a question of how much money you have to spend on your build, whether you like AMD or Nvidia more, what other parts you might balance your budget with in your build, and whether you like the future prospects of cross-firing two 470s in your build. Either way, this card has a good design, is premium in cooling and quality, and would make a good addition to your build if the budget and your preference align. Anyway, that was the RX470, let me know your thoughts below, and if you'll be getting one of these babies to put in your new machine. Thanks for watching everybody, until next time, Joshino.